Hello, today I'm going to show you how to start making the granny stripes which we add to both the top and the bottom of the first strip of squares that we made. This particular sample is now getting a little bit of a hodgepodge because basically all I'm doing is using odds and ends to show you how to do the individual stitches. So it doesn't really correspond in any way to the colours or the pattern sequences in the blanket, but the individual stitches are fine. So we've done our first strip of squares and joined them with the continuous join as you go in the pale grey colour. And now it's time to add the number of granny stripes which work above the square going up towards the top of the blanket. So we've got, at the moment this is lying on the right hand side because we have our stitch marker in place, but I'm going to turn it over so that it is on the wrong side to start. Just want to make sure this is in a good position for you. And I'm going to take the cream yarn to start the granny stripes, and we're going to work stripes up right along the top of the squares. So you start by the usual attaching your yarn into the corner of the blanket, and this stitch, the granny stripe, is always done with treble stitch. So it's just a case of chaining 2 in the corner and 1 treble in that corner space, and then in every space along put in 2 trebles, because the granny stitch, the granny stripe is done in the same way as the square, in that instead of 3 trebles, which is normal, we're just putting in 2, as you can see. Right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to work along this top, and I'll come back to you when we've got to the point where there is the join of between the 2 squares, because we have to do something slightly different there. So I'll work along and I'll see you there. Now here we are. I've done my row of granny stripe along here, and I've got to this join. Now if I was to put 2 trebles in there and then 2 trebles in there, it would create a space at this point, where in the next row it would mean we would end up, because we work into the spaces every time, this would be a new space, which would mean we'd end up with an extra cluster of stitches in the next row, and that's where things start to throw out the pattern and also start to make the crochet ripple a little bit. So we don't want to create a space there. We want to make our stitches as close as possible form one cluster between these 2 corners. So what we're going to do is we're going to start in the first corner and put in a treble stitch as normal, and then we're going to start again in the same corner as if we were going to do a second treble, but this time we're only going to yarn over once, and we're going to leave 2 loops on the hook, and then we're going to yarn over and jump over the join until we get to the corner of the, make sure I've got it there, the corner of the next square, and that's there. I'm going to put in my hook and bring it through and pull through 2 and then pull through 3, and if you have a look, I'll use my needle, you can see that what's happened is I've done a treble 2, what's called treble 2 together. So we've got 2 posts of the stitches, but there is only 1 stitch on the top, and that has decreased these 2 stitches. And then I'm going to finish off this corner with 1 more treble. And that is giving us, it is still a little bit bigger than these two clusters of 2. It's actually a cluster of 3 now, but it's a size that come the next row, when I show you, you'll be able to work right over it without being tempted to put another stitch in the middle and giving yourself too many stitches. And so I shall work along to this point here. I'll do that again, and then I'll show you what happens when we come to the end of the row. So I've worked along the second square, and we're now at the join between the 2 squares again. So I'll just show you this once more. It's treble 1 into the first corner, yarn over, insert your hook in the same corner, pull up your loop, yarn over, pull through 2 loops, leave 2 loops on your hook, then yarn over again, insert your hook into the next corner, pull up your loop, yarn over, pull through 2 loops, yarn over, pull through 3 loops, and then finish off with 1 more treble. So you'll do that in every join all the way along. And I'm going to work along now until I get to the end, which we'll pretend is the very end of your row. So you'll have done right along over the 11 squares, and I'll show you what happens when we get to the end. So now I'm along to the very end. I've just stopped short of the final corner because I want to show you what we do there. So in the final corner, you know how we started at the beginning with chain 2 and a treble in the same corner space. At this point, we're going to finish with just 1 treble stitch. But we're not going to complete it, because at this point I'm going to change colour. So I'm going to be changing from cream to a green for the next stripe, and this is the point where we change colour, halfway through your final treble. So I've got this far and there are still 2 loops on my hook, and I'm going to cut my cream yarn because we don't need that anymore, and I'm going to I'm going to make a little slip knot and put that yarn onto my hook, tighten it up a little bit. Now we've got this treble stitch to finish. Just try and hold everything nice and firmly. Wait a minute, that's it. Make sure that we've got the right end. Okay, so we've got here, and what you want to do now is just pull that green loop through your 2 cream ones, and that's you ready to start your next row. So while you're on this side, chain 2, and then turn your work, and it's time to work back along your row of granny stripes, your cream row with the green. And like we did at the beginning of the cream row, you put a treble stitch into that same space, and then just work along with your treble 2. Very easy, but by remembering to do 1 stitch only in the last corner, it means that you have a nice neat edge. So I'll show you. You can see these ends, they'll get sewn in, but you can see how the edge of the granny stripe is running in conjunction with the edge of the squares. Now I'm just going to keep going along here because there's only one thing I want to show you, and that's when we come to this funny bit where we did the treble 2 together in the previous row. there? Yeah. So here we are. We've got to this point where you can see this is a bigger group of stitches than the cluster of 2, but it's not one that we're going to work in the middle. As I said, that creates too many stitches. So we're going to do our treble 2 as normal. And then I'm going to jump right over all these 3 stitches and treble 2 in the next space. Now it's going to look at this point as if there's a fairly big space that you've travelled and created a fairly big space there. That doesn't matter because it sorts itself out as you work up the other rows. So that's what to do with the second row. And remember, when you come to this point as well, you do your 2 trebles in there, right over and do 2 trebles in there. This, by the way, is, you might find at several points, hopefully not, but occasionally when you're working your granny squares and you're maybe not paying 100% attention, your granny stripes, the stitch count might go out. And throughout the pattern, I remind you how many clusters of treble, of granny clusters you're supposed to have in a stripe. It's in the pattern. But every so often you might find that you've got an extra one. And this is usually the culprit. It's usually you've been working along without really thinking and you've worked in between these 2 clusters. Remember, that's 1 cluster, not 2, and jump from there to there. When you get to the end, remember that you will work your final stitch in here. Now I'm going to continue all the way along here and I'll just quickly show you what happens at the end before you start your next row. Now you can see that I've worked all the way along with the green and in the granny stripe, and I've got to just about the end of the row. I put my last 2 treble stitches in the space, and now I've got 1 treble left and the chain 2 from the start of the cream row. And what you're going to do is just work in between these 2 and put 1 treble stitch in. And that keeps that looking nice and straight. Now, I'm not going to change colour in this row, so all I need to do is chain 2 and turn once more. And I can continue with the granny stripe, working into the first space. And then with one, that was with 1 treble stitch, obviously, because we've got the chain 2, and you can see that that is growing up nice and straight along that edge. And when you come to this point here, where it looks like a fairly, because you've jumped over the 3 stitches in the cream row, and it looks like a big gap, that gets closed up by the time you put your 2 trebles in there, and you don't see the gap anything like as much. So you would work your rows up to the top of the blanket, and then you would turn the thing over, turn it round, and work the rows below as well. And that's how to do the granny stripe. There are certain parts of the blanket where there are quite a few rows of granny stripe, and that's a point where you can sit back, relax. You don't have to do any counting. You don't have to change colour, particularly apart from occasionally at the ends. And it's a relaxing part of the blanket between the squares. So that's how to do the granny stripe.